So this is part of our Water Wednesdays series that we have. We are currently in the planning stages of our webinars that are coming up, but we did one on quick water wins last month, and there's a link to the recording at the end of this in the slides. And you will get a copy of the slides after the recording, probably, or after the webinar closes, either today or tomorrow. So you'll have access to all these links. You don't have to write them down. So today we're going to talk about identifying larger projects, calculating costs and benefits, evaluating those projects, some tools for calculations, places to start saving water, and some resources. And as Mimi mentioned, if you have questions along the way, please put them into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will get to them at the end. So today's focus, I just wanted to put everybody on the same page of what I'm talking about. We had a quick wins webinar last month that was talking about things that are a low level of effort and require like no or low cash in order to do them. So small operation and maintenance changes, low cost retrofits, things like that. And then today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about moderate scale and large scale projects. And those are the ones that require a larger level of effort and investment. The medium-sized ones or the moderate-sized ones are things like doing a full water assessment with flow meters to verify problems and savings. And then we're talking about larger, high level of effort projects and capital expenditures for bigger things like equipment and system replacements or renovations and designing new spaces. So just to give you a quick overview, WaterSense is a voluntary program that was started by EPA in 2006, and we work to provide simple ways for people and businesses to identify water efficient products, programs, practices, and homes. So the WaterSense label is the one that you see on the right-hand side of your screen right now, and that's found on products that are independently certified for water efficiency and performance. Back in the early 90s, when low flow products first hit the market, they didn't work very well. So each one of their specifications includes a performance test and performance requirements to make sure that any WaterSense labeled bottle that you get, you can be sure that it will perform just as well as its standard counterparts. So the WaterSense label can be found on more than 46,000 product models to date, and it's in 8 different categories. We have a suite of indoor products, including shower heads, lavatory faucets, tank type toilets, flushometer valve toilets, and flushing urinals. And then we have our outdoor products, which include spray sprinkler bodies, which control the pressure within a sprinkler head. And then we have 2 types of irrigation controllers, both the weather-based controller that gets data from a weather station to determine if watering is needed, and soil moisture sensors, which actually measure the amount of moisture in the soil with a little unit, a little sensor, and that tells you whether or not a round of irrigation is needed or if it can be skipped. So WaterSense also works with Energy Star to include water criteria in their specifications as much as we can. So when you're looking for a new product, you can look for the WaterSense or Energy Star label and know that you're getting a quality product that will save you water and energy. So just to give you a quick overview, we put together basically a graph of what types of water use profiles you could find in different types of commercial facilities. So we kind of just took some averages from different sources and kind of made some, guesses basically. So the information that you see here is really dependent on the building type, I will say, and it's also dependent on a lot of things that are happening in your building. So this may not exactly ring true for you, but it's a good start. So as you can see, there's a dark blue line at the bottom of the slide, and that represents the restroom water use. And so that's usually about 20 to 30% of water use within a building. And then the next biggest one is usually heating and cooling, which is the red one. And that one basically is 20 to 30, sometimes more within a building, and really depends on the size of the space and the different types of equipment that are used. Then we also have the green bar, which is outdoor water use. And that's really dependent on the size of your landscape and what kind of plants and irrigation products you have going on there. So other facilities have more specialized things, like restaurants obviously have a high amount of kitchen water use, but you'll see that it's kind of relatively consistent across the board, that those top three, the restroom water use, mechanical systems like heating and cooling, and the outdoor water use are usually the top three. So each facility is different, and so in order to find out how water is being used in your facility, I recommend doing a water assessment just to see where water is being used and how it's being used. And that's something that you can use to take into consideration when you're considering larger projects and different retrofits and replacement options. So one of the things that we like to remind people, I'm sure many of you know, commercial buildings are complicated. It's not like your house where you have a standard set of technologies. Every facility has different uses and different tenants, and many will need to be broken down into smaller units in order to figure out what's going on. Occupancy patterns and specialty equipment can also skew usage and water savings as well. So the occupancy pattern is really going to tell you how water is being used in your facility, and any specialized equipment could make you really skew what you're doing. Facilities with different additions and renovations from different times will also have different equipment. So you can't just assume that you have one model of toilets within your facility, because it's most likely that they are different depending on when the renovations were done. So it's important to evaluate all of these estimates separately when prioritizing projects, so you really get a sense of how water is being used and what kinds of changes you could make to make your facility more efficient. There are a couple of factors that indicate high water use and can be kind of a proxy for places where you want to take a look at water use more closely to figure out what's going on. So as I mentioned, the age of the facility is very dependent, really affects the water usage, because the older the facility, the older equipment uses more water. So almost across the board, the newer the fixture or piece of equipment, the more efficient it's going to be. And then also, as I mentioned before, the size of your landscape and your irrigated area are really going to affect your outdoor water use significantly. So local climate conditions really play off of how much water is actually needed by the plant, and that kind of determines how much water is actually needed to keep those plants alive. So you want to look for areas where you can get some plants that are more hardy and will actually need less water over time as well. And then it's important to look at the efficiency of your mechanical systems. Heating and cooling can be really significant water users, especially if you have the presence of single pass cooling, or you are looking at your cooling tower. That's going to be a big source of water use as well. Any buildings with 24/7 occupancy are going to be high water users. So things like multifamily buildings, hotels, hospitals, dormitories, and correctional facilities will all be high water users because of the actual use patterns of the people that are occupying the building. And then if there's a really water intensive function that's happening in the building, that can skew water use as well. So you're looking at things like commercial kitchens, in-house laundry, as well as surgical suites or laboratories, those can be really high water users as well. So we did a whole webinar on water assessments last year. I provide a link to the recording at the end of this webinar, so you can check that out. We probably will be doing one specifically on water assessments at some point this year. So keep an eye out for that if you want more. This is really just a basic overview. So when you do a water assessment, you want to gather information on all the sources of water that are being used in your facility, whether they're metered or unmetered. And you can do that by collecting and reviewing water bills, or you can look at your water meters as well. And you want to establish a baseline with water data from a typical year, not a year when you did a renovation or you've had something significant happen with your occupancy patterns like COVID. 2020 would not be a good year to pick. So after you have kind of established that baseline, you can start to identify all the water using fixtures, systems, and equipment that you have, and verifying the performance of those fixtures to make sure that you know that how they're working and if they need to be replaced or fixed. And then you want to choose specific projects and opportunities to save water, energy, and money. And that's going to be what we're talking about a little bit more today, is how to evaluate those projects and opportunities. So you want to gather information on your water use, and you can do this by identifying the water sources and how they're measured. Are they metered water sources? Are they unmetered? Or are they submetered? What's going on? That's what you need to figure out. So you want to look at your municipally supplied potable water, which is drinkable water, or reclaimed water, as well as surface water or groundwater that's being used, and any alternative sources like rainwater, air cooling condensate, or gray water. And then you also want to collect usage data on all these sources to help establish that baseline. If you can, we would recommend reviewing at least 2 years of water and sewer data, or looking at your unmetered sources and trying to estimate those. So you can estimate those by pumping rates or storage tank sizes. Those can be some good ones. But basically, you want to get a handle on where water is being used. And you can do that by submetering as well. So this one, we encourage for any system that's using more than 1,000 gallons per day or 100,000 gallons per year. So things like tenant spaces, irrigation systems, cooling towers, single pass cooling systems, and rainwater systems. And with the whole name of this game is really just to not wait to see the problems, waiting for your bill. So if you can find the problem before you get the bill, then you're in a much better position than if you had to wait around a month and a half to figure out what's going on. So one thing that we encourage is to think about using submeters. One thing to keep in mind is with water submeters, they don't need separate utility accounts. They can just be for internal use only. So you can consider things like temporary flow meters, which you can move around in your facility, and things like acoustic leak detection devices, which can also be strapped onto the pipe and moved around the facility. There's others that you can hard plumb into the system, and those are also very good options as well if there's a specific area that you always want data for. So these can be really helpful. You can set up alerts to quickly identify any leaks and equipment inefficiencies or malfunctions. So electronic monitoring is more precise, but it can have higher costs than manual tracking. So it's just something to consider. You want to look at what your requirements are for how often you want data and how you want that data provided. Some services can actually provide 24/7 data, and some are just basically triggering when there's a problem and will give you a phone call or an email. So some of these electronic monitors are specific to specific fixtures, like tank type toilet monitors, and others are just ones that you can strap the pipe on and move on. So the acoustic flow meter is the one that's here in the picture with the red button. That's the one that you can strap on the outside of a pipe and move around within your system. And it uses, I believe, sonar to basically get a picture of how much water is moving through the pipe past the unit. So these are all good options. There's a whole bunch of them out there. WaterSense doesn't label submeters or monitoring devices yet. So it's just something that you're going to have to look at your budget and what features you actually want, and then figure out what makes the most sense for your facility. So you can also add your water meters into your portfolio manager account. There's a water tab right next to the energy tab, and you can add your water meters in, or even your submeters. And just make sure that you're not double counting your data when you set it up. So you just make sure that you know how much is being rolled up into one number versus being its own separate number. So just pay attention when you're putting it together, and Energy Star can help you if you have problems. So one thing to keep in mind with water usage and efficiency is that you always need to verify water use data, because plumbing fixtures are notoriously leaky. They have a lot of physical components that break down over time, like valves and flappers and gaskets. So they need to be replaced on a regular basis in order to maintain the efficiency of the fixture. So when there's a problem, you know, in the energy world, it just stops working. But in the plumbing world, it can continue to work and it seems like it's working just fine, but it's actually leaking or, you know, using more water than you want it to. So it's something to just keep in mind, because leaking and continuously running water really has no added value for your facility. So it's something you want to keep on top of at all times. So you want to take a water use inventory of your facility. This is where you tour your facility and look at what types of equipment are being used. You can look at the plumbing and system diagrams to identify any issues or vulnerabilities. You can interview personnel like your maintenance staff, because they often have a lot of knowledge about the equipment or the fixtures and can really help you if you're looking for something specific. You want to capture detailed information about the equipment and the fixtures and estimate daily water use if you can. Another thing to just keep in mind is to check drain lines that are plumbed to floor drains, because you may think that since there's a drain there that the water flow is okay, but it may be a problem and you may need to pay attention to it. So it's important to make sure that if there is water flowing to a floor drain, you want to pay attention to it. And you want to verify water use wherever possible by manually checking the flow rate or installing a temporary water meter or flow meter, like those acoustic flow meters. And those can help you get information on how much water is being used by that piece of equipment or fixture. Some tools for getting you started, we have a couple of them. We have a simple water assessment checklist that you can just print out and take with you around the facility, and it guides you to look for certain things as you go along the way. We also have some water assessment worksheets, both Excel and Word versions, to help you manage all of the data that comes out of that assessment. And then there's also another one that was done by the City of Boulder using our best practices guidebook. So it's a really helpful one to evaluate your retrofit and replacement options. So after you've done the water assessment, you have to really take a look at the benefits and costs and calculate what you actually have going on. So you want to calculate savings and benefits and make sure that you're using water rates and calculating costs and including incentives. So there's a really great guidebook that was created called the Water Audit Guidance for Commercial Buildings. And it goes through a lot of the things that we're talking about today in greater detail. So you may want to check that out when you have a chance. So the goal of calculating your savings and benefits is to fully quantify the monetary benefits of the project from avoided costs and reductions in all of these things that are listed here. So you want to look at reductions in water and wastewater usage, energy from your pumping and heating your water and treating your water, whether that's electric, gas, or other fuels, your pretreatment costs, your chemical costs and testing costs, leasing or service contracting costs, labor, operation and maintenance costs, salvage value of old equipment, and all other related costs should be included. And the benefits should include things like the salvage value of old equipment and any rebates and incentives that you can find. So one thing to keep in mind is that water rates don't tell the whole story. As you can see on this, we put together a fake bill so you could take a look at what it has, what its components are. And so you can see on the upper left, it's talking about the water rates, and they're generally tiered in many cases where it's based on the total volume that you're using. So you'll see the more, in this case, it's an increasing block rate, it's called, where the amount of the unit cost of each gallon of water increases as you use more. So it's just a way to kind of get people to be more efficient. And so those are the water rates. And then you have wastewater rates, which are often called sewer rates. And that's basically talking about the amount of the cost of putting a gallon of water down the sewer. And then there's other things that are more, just general fees and costs that you need to keep in mind as well, that are things like stormwater charges and other fixed fees. Those are important to keep in mind. as well. So if you're looking at just the water rate, you're missing half of the cost. You're actually paying for each gallon of water twice. You pay for it to be supplied to your facility, and then you pay for it to be put down the sewer. So you need to make sure that you combine the water and sewer rates together to get a more accurate cost and benefits calculation. So when you're looking at water rates and sewer rates, you want to pay attention to how you're using them. So as I mentioned, in a lot of cases, there are tiered rates depending on how much water is being used. And each increment of additional volume increases the cost. So you'll see that this is probably the most common block rate that I've seen is the increasing block rate, where they're trying to get you to use less water by charging you more, depending on how much water you're using. So when you're doing your calculations and you're evaluating these projects, you want to make sure that you use the highest water rate first for potential savings. So you need to make sure you're using the highest one, because that's what you're paying. So once you get down to lower volume of usage total, then you can use some of those lower tiered rates when you're calculating your project costs. And you make sure that you have to add in your fees and other fixed costs to get the true cost of water. So for accurate savings estimates, you want to make sure that you're using actual facility rates, not average or regional rates, and make sure that you account for any upcoming rate increases that may be coming down the pike. You want to include energy savings from both natural gas and electricity, because this will especially come into play when you have hot water or you're pumping water, that you're going to save both water and energy from your project. And then you want to adjust to the actual usage rates of the fixtures and equipment. So you want to have the actual occupancy schedule, or as close as you can get to it, and things like the occupants to fixture ratio. So knowing how many urinals there are for each man is kind of helpful, because then you can tell, you can better estimate how many times that fixture is being used. And then equipment density as well, and other specifics of the building usage. And this will give you a better picture of how much water is being used and how much it costs. So when you're calculating costs, it should be the total costs of everything involved in the project, not just the water costs. So you want to look at the cost of the equipment, fixture, process, or measure, and any associated structural costs or building remodeling costs, labor costs to maintain the piece of equipment if different from before. Changes in your service contracts, such as cooling tower treatment costs, will be significant sometimes, as well as chemical and supply costs as well. And any change to your insurance rates or your liability can also increase your costs as well. And the cost to install or implement the equipment would be helpful to include, as well as the cost of removing any existing equipment earlier than you expected. And then all associated labor costs to implement the measure. So you want to look at all these costs and add them up so that you're really getting a full picture of how much is actually, how much is actually costing you. When you're doing this, you want to include any rebates and incentives that you can find. You want to check for both water and energy rebates, because both utilities often provide rebates for specific fixtures, especially, or pieces of equipment. So there's a national database of energy efficiency utility rates and rebates. It's called Desire. And then there isn't really an equivalent for water use rebates, but WaterSense has a rebate finder on our website that is basically information we've gotten from our partners. But honestly, you probably just want to contact your utilities directly to find out what kind of rebates they have for you. Sometimes they'll even do, if you're doing a larger retrofit or replacement or a big renovation, they may be willing to give you a customized rebate or a credit for some of your larger projects if you can prove that you're using less water and energy. There's also a potential for a sewer credit or an evaporation credit, and that's where you can basically prove that the water hasn't been discharged to the sewer, it's been evaporated. So things like irrigation and cooling towers, there's a lot of evaporation happening there, and that water's not going down the sewer. So some places will actually give you a credit for that. And they may be able to connect you with other programs or help you with technical assistance, or some may even provide an actual assessment for you. So just give them a call, find out what's available for you, and that'll help you get the full picture. So you want to contact both the water and energy utilities, both electric and gas utilities, to get the full picture. And then you want to consider other financing sources. Sometimes you can lease large equipment and other expensive equipment rather than buying it. So it's something to consider for things like cooling towers and really large pieces of equipment like that. Sometimes there's property assessed clean energy programs called PACE for short. And that's basically where you have a large, basically a large equipment replacement or other large renovation in your facility, and you can pay for that over time using your property taxes. So you'll have to Google that to find out more information, but there's a lot of information there that is an option for you in some states. You may want to also consider looking at ESCOs, energy savings contracts, because they can sometimes provide you with private financing for the actual upgrade, or installing the better, more efficient product. Some of these are also doing performance-based contracts where they're paid over the savings that you get over time. So you save energy and water, and they actually take their fee out of that savings. So there's no cost up front. For some of these things, an investment grade audit might be required, and that's probably going to involve an engineer and making sure that everybody that's involved in the deal is comfortable with the information. So next, you want to evaluate your projects and prioritize them using some financial calculations if possible, including simple payback, net present value, and equipment life utility cost comparisons. So I pulled this information from this guidebook for water audits and commercial buildings. So if you want more information, there's a lot of really great information in the report. So I encourage you to check it out. So I'm not going to get into the big details of things, into the nitty gritty, but I'll just give you an overview of these methods so that you have a better idea of how to, actually use them. So simple payback is the most basic method, and that finds out when the project pays for itself. And unfortunately, it's kind of a partial picture because it ignores any costs and savings for the life of the project. It just wants to know that it pays back in 3.5 years or 5 years or whatever your time period is. So it's just basically the costs divided by the savings, and then that gives you the payback, and then 1 divided by the payback is the return on investment. So in this case, the one that has the highest return on investment or the shortest payback period are the most desirable. So again, this is the most basic calculation that you can do for it. There's also a net present value, and this is the most robust because it compares costs and benefits over time in today's dollars. So it allows you to compare completely different projects, and it can give you kind of a standard to look across the board and see how they actually compare to each other. The variables depend on the organization. There's a discount rate that's used in it's basically R in this equation, and that is basically the amount of money that you could make on that money if you were to invest it in the stock market or in government bonds. So for example, the federal government's discount rate is 3% because that money would otherwise be put into government bonds that pay 3% in interest. Many companies use 7% because that's the amount that you would get if you invested in the stock market. So in this case, the calculation is here, but I put the Excel formula at the bottom. If you want to use that, that might be easier instead of trying to calculate it yourself by hand. It's in this case only ones with positive net present value are acceptable. So this is one where you look at and it may, one may be negative, meaning that the project will lose money. But if you have a positive net present value, that means that you're making money over time from that particular investment. So possible options for evaluating which projects to do is you can look at the shortest to longest payback period. You can do the highest to lowest net present value, or the highest to lowest potential for water savings. Sometimes programs also go most visible to least visible. Sometimes they don't want a big project that will affect any tenants or occupants in the building, so they might decide to do one that's least visible, so people aren't getting disrupted in their routines. And some of them use the greatest to least overall environmental benefit. So we also had an equipment utility cost savings model that I'm not going to talk about, but basically it's looking at the amount of savings and costs of the actual utilities over time and comparing them over the life of the product. So check out that report. It has a lot more details about it in there. But basically you want to bring the best case scenario that you can to your management so that they can choose which projects to actually do and which projects to hold off on for now. So this is just an example of the prioritized list. So the text is a little bit small, but you can see basically that the top 2 projects have an immediate payback, while other ones have a smaller payback period. So you may want to do those top 2 projects first and then use that information and savings to do other projects along the way. Sometimes it's helpful to get savings started so that you actually have some positive cash flow for the facility, and then they can use that information and that cash flow to justify doing other projects down the road. So there's also a savings calculator that was created by the City of Boulder using our best practices guidebook for commercial and institutional facilities. And so this one's done, it's free to use, and it's totally customizable for your facility. You can plug in existing fixture and equipment information, and it'll, along with your current water rates and usage, and it'll help you spit out those calculations to estimate the savings and help you consider different retrofit and replacement projects. So it's at the bottom of this page that is linked here. And this is what it looks like. So you basically can go in and customize it depending on how old your facility is and what types of equipment that you would see in that facility. And so it has tabs for different specific projects like appliances, as well as your cooling towers and your kitchens and some of the things like that that are really specific water users in your facility. And it goes through and it talks about your usage rates and what kinds of equipment that you currently have. So you'll see it has lines for the estimated installation of the equipment, like when it was installed, as well as, you know, how much fuel the building is using or how much, what type it is. And then as well as the number of restroom users and shower users and annual days of operation. So that's kind of getting at the occupancy patterns of the facility and can help you straighten out these tabs. So these tabs have specific information in them, but they collect information about the piece of equipment and then kind of spit out some more information about that for you to use in your calculations. So there are specific tabs for some big water users, as I mentioned, for kitchens is one, food disposals are another because they used, 5 to 10 gallons of water per minute. So they're really significant water users, as are cooling towers. So these tabs will help you kind of organize your information and help kind of put out a list of potential projects and how much they're going to cost you to do. So this is what the project retrofit and replacement options look like. So you can see that it has both the installed cost as well as any rebates that are available so that it can give you the basic payback and what kind of savings you could expect to see from that project. So it's a good way to organize your information. And so it puts together a summary tab with initial payback and savings estimates. It doesn't get into net present value, but that can be calculated with the information that's in this summary tab. most of the time. So this is just a way to, as I said, organize your information, and it's a nice report to show to your management. So those are the tools that I would suggest you use. And I just wanted to go through some of the things to keep in mind if you're going to do a retrofit or replacement project. So you want to check the compatibility of your plumbing system if you have an older building with any new fixtures and systems before you install them. You may need to consult a plumbing engineer to learn about the constraints of your system and inspect drain lines for any damage or wear before you install things like new toilets or urinals. Because of the plumbing system in your building, you may want to consider doing a pilot with a few fixtures in different parts of your building before you retrofit everything, just to see how it works before you actually do all of it. As I mentioned before, leak and water waste are really significant things to pay attention to. And I know we're not talking about leaks specifically today, but I wanted to be sure that you guys understood that it's something to consider regardless of what project that you're doing. So any spikes in your water usage can be found on your monthly bill or in your meter readings or your sub-meter readings. And the whole point is to try to find these leaks and problems as soon as possible so they can be fixed. Sometimes those leak detection devices or failure abatement devices will give you an alert. They'll send you an email or a phone call or a text message. And sometimes you can also identify leaks through a walkthrough of the facility or during a water audit or water assessment. The other thing to keep in mind is just making sure your employees and visitors know what to do with a leak once they see one. Sometimes you just need to provide the phone number and how to report the leak so that you get that information from whoever's there in the facility. Some things to keep in mind with restrooms, because I'm going to go through the top three that we talked about before: restrooms, cooling and heating, and outdoor water use. Because restrooms can account for up to 40% of your water use, they are important to keep in mind in any project that you're doing. If you have fixtures that were installed before 1994, they use 3 to 5 times more water than the current newer efficient models that are on the market right now. And because water savings depends so much on user behavior, you have to really look at your occupancy data. It's not going to be obvious if you just know how many fixtures you have. You need to know how many people are using them. And then you want to make sure that you educate users and conduct regular maintenance to achieve the greatest savings. So if you install a dual flush toilet, for example, you want to make sure that you include instructions on how to use it so that users won't get confused and just use the full flush model all the time, or the full flush option all the time. So if you're going to do a small scale retrofit, you may want to consider faucets and aerators and shower heads. For a larger scale, look at toilets and urinals, because they are going to save you the most water over time. Unfortunately, they are the most expensive, but there are a lot of inexpensive options that are out there in the market these days that are WaterSense labeled. So here's just a chart of all of the water use levels of WaterSense labeled fixtures. The only fixtures that we don't label in a commercial building for sanitary fixtures or restroom fixtures are public use faucets. So those are the ones that are found in like a hallway restroom or being used by the public, and they already have a very low national standard for them, so there's no extra savings that you can really gain there, so we don't label them. But all the rest of the plumbing products are labeled, and there are different units that are offered at lots of different price points with different features, so there's a lot of options out there for you to find what's best for your facility. So you also want to target your mechanical systems, because they can account for up to 30% of your water use, sometimes up to 50%, depending on your facility. This is a big one to sub-meter and to check for leaks and inefficiencies on a regular basis, especially if there's hot water or steam involved, because that will actually save you water and energy. You want to minimize water used in single pass cooling systems, which we'll talk about in a second. and maximize your cooling tower cycles of concentration. So single pass cooling is where the water goes through the piece of equipment once before it's sent down the sewer. So it removes heat and it cools the system, but it just goes straight to the sewer after one use. And so this actually uses 40 times more water to cool the same heat load as a cooling tower. So you want to make sure that you can get rid of as many single pass cooling pieces of equipment as you can. These include things like ice machines, refrigerators, air conditioners, air compressors, vacuum systems, things like that. So if you can, replace it with an air-cooled piece of equipment. And you want to, or you can also reuse the water in a closed loop recirculating system, or you can use the minimum flow rate required by the manufacturer. So you kind of start with the minimum flow rate, try to plumb it within another closed loop system, and then if you can't do any of that, replace it with air cooling. So just to give you a sense of how much water we're talking about, we put together a quick visual. So as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, this is what 1 gallon per minute looks like. It's a faucet, a garden hose at low flow. So that's about 1 gallon per minute, and that adds up to about 5,000 gallons a year, $5,000 a year. If you look on the right side, that's a garden hose at full flow, and that's about 6 gallons per minute and $30,000 per year. So this is just to show you that if water is going through your piece of equipment and you're only using it once, this is how much water you're sending down the drain on a regular basis, and it adds up very quickly. So you want to make sure that you're reusing water where you can, or putting it into a recirculating system, or getting rid of it altogether by using air-cooled equipment. So as I mentioned, cooling towers can be really significant. They can be 20 to 50% of your total facility water use, and they use a lot of energy because they're pumping water continuously, so they're good targets for water and energy savings. So one thing to keep in mind is that evaporation is not the target for water efficiency. In this case, the cooling tower uses evaporation to remove the heat from the water, so we want that to be happening. That's not where we're trying to save water. You want to save water by looking at the chemistry of the tower and how much water is going through it. So basically what this cooling tower does is it recirculates water a certain number of times before that water is sent down the sewer. And that number of times that it's recirculated is called cycles of concentration. So it may be 3 cycles of concentration where it's going through the system 3 times, and you may be able to increase it to 5 times, which would save you a lot of water. So in this case, you want to use submeters to monitor both the makeup and blowdown lines. The water that's being reused multiple times eventually will have scale buildup or mineral buildup in it, just because there are minerals in drinking water. So some of that water is sent down to the sewer to clean the system and add cool water back in. So that's basically the same thing as makeup and blowdown. So the way to monitor this whole process and to make sure that you're getting the right cycles of concentration is to monitor the conductivity of the water in the tower. And you want to check your ratios of the amount of water that's blown down to reduce the minerals and the amount of water that's coming in as to make up the water that was lost. So in many cases, there's a cooling tower or water treatment vendor that specializes in water efficiency that can help you. So sometimes it's just having a conversation with that vendor to say that water efficiency is your goal and to talk to them about what you can do to improve the performance of your tower. In many cases, they're the ones that know and they're the ones that can help. So they usually also leave you a report when they go. So it's important to read the report to make sure that you're performing as well as you expect to be, and looking at, because it will tell you the number of cycles of concentration that you have within your system, and that will help you to figure out where you are in your performance. So the last one is going to be outdoor water waste, and this is 20 to 30% of a building water use, depending on the actual size of the irrigated area. and the types of plants that are there. So basically what you're trying to do is to match the plants to the amount of water that you get in normal rainfall so that you don't need extra water for them to survive. So in many cases, half of the water used outdoors for irrigation is wasted because of an inefficient watering method or irrigation system. So it's important to kind of stop those losses and make sure your system is working as expected. So the losses are often caused by poor system design or installation. Lack of maintenance is a big one, and improper scheduling of the watering schedule. So there are auditors that can help you by checking your system. WaterSense partners with irrigation professionals to basically, they pass a test that we've reviewed to show that they actually have knowledge of water efficiency. And then once they pass the test, they make it onto our website so that people can find them. So if you're looking for people in your area that can help you, there's a link there to look at the professionals. So we do a whole webinar on outdoor water use each year. So I encourage you to check that out. We also do one on restroom water use and cooling tower and mechanical system water use. So today was just a really, really basic overview, but you can check out those other webinars to dig deeper. If you want help, there are Energy Star service provider partners that many of them will do both energy efficiency and water efficiency work and can help you with a variety of your projects. So there's a list of the most commonly used ones on Energy Star's website. So I encourage you to check those out. It could be a good place to start to try to find someone. Your local utility may also know some people in your area that can help you as well. So there's a lot out there. So it's really just dependent on what you actually want done and how much you're willing to pay for it. So finally, we have a bunch of resources that can help you with this stuff. We have a whole tools and training section of our website that includes our best practices guidebook, as well as our water saving tips, assessment tools, worksheets and checklists, and links to case studies, as well as the recorded webinars that are done during this series. This is our best practices guidebook. It's called WaterSense at Work, and we're in the process of updating it right now. And basically it goes through every piece of water using equipment within a facility, in a commercial or institutional facility. And it talks about how you can operate and maintain that to get the most water savings, as well as any retrofits or replacements. It gives you things to think about when you're doing those retrofits or replacements. We also have some that are specific to multifamily buildings, so you can find those on our WaterScore multifamily website as well. So as I mentioned, this is one of our Water Wednesdays webinars that we do. We haven't finished planning for the year. We're in the process of figuring out what webinars to come up with for you guys. We will most likely be covering the following topics, as I mentioned: restroom water use, outdoor water use, mechanical systems such as cooling and heating, and then water assessments. So if there are other topics that you are interested in seeing, type those in the chat and let us know what you want to see. We will try to do about 8 of these a year, so we have 6 more coming up throughout the year. So you can get the information for them on the Energy Star training email that comes out once a month, or you can find the information through an email you get from WaterSense as well. So if you can't wait, we have a bunch that were recorded from last year. And so I'll call your attention, we did one specifically on the energy water nexus, and then one specifically on sub-metering strategies. So if you're interested in learning more about those types of equipment, I encourage you to check out the training webinars that were done this past year. And then there was one that we did specifically on kitchens. So if you're in a restaurant or commercial kitchen containing facility, then check that one out as well. And then there are also other resources, that water audit guidance for commercial buildings. That's the one I've been pointing to for the different financial calculations. There's also a self-audit guidebook that was done by the South Florida Water Management District. It's really good. It goes through step by step of how to do an audit at your facility. So it can be really helpful if you're doing it yourself. It's got lots of pictures and lots of calculations that it can help you with. And then there's one that's specifically on cooling towers. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can check those out as well. So what can you do right now? We went through a whole bunch of material today, but right now you can start collecting your water bills and tracking your water use in Portfolio Manager. You can check and find out your existing meter locations or areas and systems where you might need new submeters. You can check out the water assessment worksheets to find some of the low-hanging fruit and target your highest water users. And then you can start your equipment and fixture inventory if you don't already have one, and pull together a list of potential projects and contact utilities to see what rebates and incentives are available for you. So that's all I'm going to talk about for today, but I'm going to go through some of the questions that you guys have sent in. So please put